Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing this morning? It's Tuesday, the Explicit Measures Podcast again. We're back with some
Happy Tuesday.
We're back with some more
Happy
topics.
Tuesday.
So some general announcements or things that have been happening recently in the Power BI space. Just want to kind of kick things off with here. I've been seeing a lot of Twitter buzz about this auto aggregations. Have you guys checked that out at all or looked at that at all at this point?
I've not dove in, but very very interested in this one because we had when it was preview roadmapped. I think we spent a lot of time talking about it.
I think so. Yeah. So this will be interesting. Tommy, what do you think?
We'll see how much close this is to Auto DAX. So I'm very hopeful.
Tommy's skeptical out of the gate.
Why?
Christian Wade's gonna be like, slams his coffee cup into your face. Tommy.
The man was responsible for the ALM toolkit, which I love. It's just the aggregation. This is a different beast. I'm not backtracking, but this is obviously not. How quickly is this going to be something of a click of a button? So you want to.
I'm
hopeful. I'm hopeful.
Aggregation.
I think this is going to be pretty slick. Honestly, I'm actually quite looking forward to the automatic aggregations. So for those of you who are not following along, just very briefly here, you can do aggregations on your Power BI data set that'll make smaller subsets, allow you to have aggregated forms of information, and the intent here is, a majority, maybe 60, 70, 80% of your data can be aggregated to some form, and those aggregations will serve most of your visuals. You're already doing some sort of, sum of sales by day or by month. You can kind of figure out what those queries look like. I think what's happening here is Microsoft has said, hey, look, we've got all this really rich query data, and now so this kind of coincides with what's going on from a feature. You can now use Azure Logging or Azure Analytics logs or something like that. So you can turn on your Power BI, your basically your Power BI data model, and log all the queries that come out of it. So my gut feel here is, if you're listening to all the queries that are coming from your Power BI data set, you can start looking at like, oh, look, this dimension column called date is used all the time. We should probably aggregate this thing called sales by a date or something like that. So I think there may be some pieces to there that they're looking at, they're listening to, and they're using that to build the auto aggregations. So I want to play with it more. I haven't had a chance to get into it yet. The article's out on the Microsoft blog if you want to check it out. So
doesn't auto infer that my reports are just going to become faster and faster?
I think that's the assumption.
On their own, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe I don't even be able to publish the service and then download. And
Well,
second, you don't know if Auto DAX is actually going to be good or not.
How do you know? Well, right, but
so you're taking that as a negative. But
so what I want to know is how do you find out whether or not auto aggregations is doing anything?
That's a good question. Like, how do you know? How do you know? You'll never know. They'll never know.
Tabular Editor 4.
Yeah, they'll know.
Tabular Editor 4. Anyways, it'll be an interesting feature. I'd like to see what people kind of have some feedback. People seem to be very excited about it. So just FYI, if you haven't looked into it, there's some great articles. Go to Microsoft blog, check it out, and there should be some really cool things around the auto aggregations that might help you out. Anyway, I have other thoughts about that, but we'll move on.
Yeah,
let's move on.
I'm currently. I think a blog is incoming.
Got some frustrations you're gonna blog out?
No, not well. I mean,
voice my opinion.
Hey, there's always a use case that isn't it doesn't fit in the box of beautiful documentation. So per your suggestion, and to limit the nights of 3 a.m. large model refreshes like last night.
Oh boy,
the whole backup restore thing is something I've been digging into. And setting up the configuration to do that on a lake that was set up initially in connection with data flows is turning out to be
challenging,
not so straightforward.
Oh boy.
We'll see how I figure that out.
That's also another really good feature. I really like the idea of the auto backing up. It's basically tie a lake to a Power BI data model, and there's like, I don't know what the file type is. It's like I want to say RDL, but I know that's the wrong file type. But there's like an RTP file or some kind
Oh,
of
it's an RDB. Oh, yeah, the file type.
the file type is different, but it's literally the compressed data model in a file
Yeah.
that you can just kind of like move around, and the analysis service will know how to read that file, so you can start lobbying these files into a location.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts around there would be, one is we got to test out to see how fast it restores.
Sure.
Because the nice thing is it's for recovery,
Yep.
right? So if something goes bonkers, you could restore it depending on, how long it takes.
Sure.
The other thing that should be doable in here is, based on the documentation I've been reading, is to create a model in a different workspace and then restore it into the other workspace, right? So
hot swapping data into production. That's cool. I like that idea a lot.
So I'll have to, vetting that out.
That would be great, because then it'd be like a quick swap. You could spend days refreshing data, and then all of a sudden at the very end, just go.
Well, then there's
switch.
And then there's no late nights anymore.
Oh, I like that a lot.
Just push that into a thing,
and hopefully it's all scriptable.
Late nights, that's a pipe dream.
Yeah. Well, now we're in a realm where it is, right?
Yeah,
and that's what's super nice. You can you can do like lazy, like behind the scenes kickoff of backups and stuff like that.
Oh, I like this. Oh, that got a lot better than I thought initially.
Yeah.
Really like that feature already.
I really like the idea of when you have to write something nasty about Microsoft or just in general, you just say I have to write some non-documentation. That actually is a great way to put it.
I don't think I've ever write anything nasty. It's more of like my vision of what this thing should have done is kind of slightly off. It's more like
sounds like the same thing to me, but
the documentation is just general guideline. Like this is how it should work. But this is why they love blogs and stuff, because they don't know every use case, right? They don't know what my environment setup is like, or why I'm having problems.
That's true.
Right? Like that's why they have support.
True statement. So today, we'll transition from there into topics. Those are kind of a good intro pieces. Moving into, this is going to be purely kind of around report building, and this is going to be focusing on all the ways you can filter things on a report. So there are a couple of different methods, and really, I think we're going to potentially focus here on slicers versus the filter pane. So quick background on the slicers and the filter pane. Let me just give a quick little history there of kind of how the tools kind of matured into those two pieces. When you build reports initially in the very early versions of Power BI Desktop, you'd have a report page. You could filter your data and basically pick from a list of values. You could, or multiple values. You could go to a slicer. It's a certain visual you bring and put on the report canvas. When you put that on the report canvas, you click one or two or three multiple items. That applies a filter context to the page. And when we first got Power BI Desktop, that's all we had. We had no other filtering mechanism for us to understand what was going on. Now, in addition to that, we later on, maybe the progression was this: people started building their own filter panels, right? You'd build a button, and then some kind of flyout would appear, and then you'd have a selection or a pick list of here's multiple slicers, and it may cover the entire page. So actually, this is some stuff that Seth and I kind of started building very early on in the Power BI Desktop space with bookmarks. When bookmarks showed up, I had the ability of hiding and showing elements on the page. And so my first inclination was, I hate using all the canvas space or all my report space for filtering. I'd rather click a button and present multiple filters all at once. You could change the values you needed, and then you could kind of close it or hide it or sneak it away on the side. So that's the next thing that I saw kind of in the Power BI space. And then finally, Microsoft said, hey, this is a good enough idea. We should probably build our own filter pane. And so they actually made this thing called the filter pane, which sometimes it is a pain to work with, but it's still there. It's a window on the right-hand side of the report page that flies out, and you can add filters to the visual, the page, or the report level. And those are kind of the filter contexts that you have inside the filter pane. So that's kind of the context, and that's the background of kind of where we're at. Let's kind of jump in. Like, Tommy, when you build reports, do you use one or the other more, or what do you prefer?
So it's interesting you say that kind of the history of it. One thing you're not missing with the history, but they always had a filter pane. However, it would look the same format as in desktop. the old version of desktop where it was brown on brown kind
I,
of thing. It didn't look like it was extended. Yeah, it was always part of desktop. It
nope,
was part of desktop. It was the same thing part of desktop.
not in
I
the.
want to look at
I don't think so.
in the service, but you couldn't tell. No one knew. There was always the right hand side. We can't look at version history from the service. If anyone's on here that's used Power BI since 2000,
I guarantee you there
it was so ambiguous though that nobody knew.
No.
Okay.
Tommy, you're gonna have to go grab screenshots. I have every single desktop download since the start.
It's not the desktop. It was on the service.
Well, I don't know.
It would show up on the service.
No.
But no one knew because it looked exactly the same. It was that gray on gray.
Maybe. I don't know.
But it was, you could not do any formatting to it, and it was so bad that no one used it. So you used slicers.
I never
find
saw
a video from
so you're in agreement. It wasn't always in the desktop.
I'm talking primarily
saying
desktop.
I'm saying the service. It would show up in the service.
You're saying it was in the service?
Yeah. And okay, how about let's make a gentleman's
pick something
we can't test.
We can't verify. Yeah.
Yeah, and it made rainbows and kitty cats too.
Let's make a gentleman's bet. I'll find a video from 2007 of someone doing a video on Power BI, and if I'm right, you owe me dinner. If not, I'll buy you both dinner.
Okay, I like big steaks.
Virtual deal. All right.
That's confident. So you had to edit the report in the service to include them, or it was automatic?
So,
or maybe this filter pane is different how I perceived it, right? Because my perception of filter pane is like literally I can drag a column of data into the filter pane, and that's kind of like was the feature that was added into desktop way later on.
Okay, so this may have been only for visuals then, visual level. It would show up for a visual level.
I could see,
but it was still on the right hand.
That I could see because you can apply a visual specific filter,
right?
But it didn't live when the report was live and running. So I will agree to that one. Like when you had a visual and you dropped fields on the visual and you needed to apply a filter to just the visual, I could see that.
Right. But so even in like version 2, so to speak, of the service, when you could do the filter pane, because before they had the formatting of the filter pane that you could do visual, because for the report author, I think it was more intended for the report author, you could do page, report, and visual level filters on the filter pane. That existed in the service too, but it looked exactly like it did in desktop. Not necessarily when it was rolled out initially, but that was available early on. And it was so bad though that you would use slicers.
I'm gonna call Will and be like, "Did you?" I need to call Will
again. Dinner. What do you? Well, I'll pick sushi. You can pick steak. I'm happy with that.
This is gonna be one of those like, see, I told you, and we're like, yeah, but this is not what we were talking.
That's not what we were trying to say.
It's not what I was intending.
Maybe technically you were there, but
yeah. Regardless, let's say 2008 then, right? Let's go to 2008. Let's jump 2 years. And they had the filter pane for report, page, and visual but it was not, you couldn't format it.
Correct.
And you couldn't, for a user, much less an author in the service, you couldn't really tell. So everyone used slicers. The day that they came out with formatting for the filter pane is the day that we switched to slicers to filter pane.
Oh,
more or less.
Okay.
Literally, not literally, but it was a staggered rollout.
Yeah, sure.
But when the ability for you to select a visual card and when it was
I just want to pause there for a moment. So you're saying the functionality of the filter pane was there, but it was important for the organization that it look like the rest of the report.
Not only that, but so you actually knew what the heck you were filtering.
So spending time in visuals,
and
making sure properties and the ability to make it look like you want it to is important for organizations.
Yeah, Seth.
Okay,
100%.
Thanks, Tommy. Just wanted to validate that.
Was I being ambiguous on this? I don't know. Okay. Okay.
You're perfectly clear.
I feel like I'm getting caught in a trap.
Emphasizing a point there.
Okay.
This is indicative. This is indicative of Seth going in future conversations talking about Charticulator. He'll be like, Tommy, remember when you said it was important for organizations to style and create style and things? Yeah, it's definitely worth it for you to use Charticulator.
I don't even have to wait for Charticulator, but I could use it in tables or something.
That's amazing.
Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted.
You're fine. That's for our revisited episode. Let's see how much we backtrack over the years. Um, but the ability, because before, the only way you knew if something was applied, like for a desktop too, before they actually rolled it out, was it was in italics. Like the filter card, a card would be in italics saying this is filtered, which was so hard to see, much for a desktop author, much
Oh,
less a user.
I do remember
Yeah,
that part. I do remember
you
that
just have to
part.
look. Okay, that's in italics. Okay, that means we're applying a filter.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not
So
helpful.
the day that, yes, you can use the same formatting, now that this part of the report theme filter pane, you can say this is applied and make it a light color. So a user can say, hey, something's different here. Oh, this is applied. That's when the filter pane became more prominent
Hmm.
prominent for us, and to roll it out to the users. And the number one reason is, well, the number one reason out of multiple reasons is you're taking now you're freeing up precious real estate on the report, because where do slicers usually go? On the top of a report. Where's the most prominent and number one primary space on a report? We've talked about this. It's the top left and then the top right.
Yep.
And when you're using slicers there, you're taking away precious real estate from something actually insightful. So that's kind of my use of the filter from the filter side, is using the filter pane, but making sure you're using formatting effectively.
So I would. So you said a lot of things, are Tommy, and I'm going to touch on a couple of them, right? So one of the things that so this is maybe just an American thing, or people who read left to right, top to bottom. But how I'm used to reading reports is that's how I read a book. That's how we kind of like. And the reason Tommy is saying the most important area on a report page is that top left hand side, because that's kind of how our culture kind of. There's many other cultures out there, and I want to be very mindful that like other people read things different directions, and so your level of importance may change on the report page. But for my experience, most of the important pieces are in the upper left hand corner. So if you want people to focus on some very key details or specific things, you kind of start with the top left corner and then go across the top of the page, and those are your kind of most important highest level items that you're going to find. And then as you work your way down the page, because I'm reading, right? So the more detailed, less important things, maybe they're still probably important, but I don't want you to think of them first, is in the bottom right hand side. And
Mhm.
so when you see report designs, and especially when you saw early report designs with filters, all the filters went to the top left hand side, and they were kind of taking up the most valuable real estate for your KPIs or your high level aggregations, or that's where we should be putting the green arrow up or the red arrow down for sales or whatever we need to action on. Those should be our kind of most aggregated pieces. So I think that's a really good point. I would 100% agree with you, Tommy. The experience of having italicized text to tell you something's active or not active is not the best UI design practice, and I think Microsoft has recognized that and since changed it. So I think that's a really good option that's been changed now with the filter pane. So I'll kick it over to you, Seth. We're kind of going around. Tommy kind of said he's now using mostly just the filter pane. Seth, do you have a preference one way or the other, slicers or filter pane?
Slicers for life. No. I mean, to your point, Mike, we built some pretty highly customized experiences,
Yeah.
right, in reports.
Yes.
So the way I kind of thought about this is when you're using one or the other, it depends, right?
Yeah.
Predominantly, I'm using the filter pane for a lot of the filters. I would say in report designs, I'm still using slicers, but on a limited scale where they're very specific to a visual,
Mm.
and have some data elements in it that are not in general, like I'm going to look up a product name or I'm going to look up a user, like it's if you select this option in the drop down, the visual is going to change drastically or something, right? To give
Yeah.
give the end user a different view. You can do that with bookmarks as well, but sometimes slicers are more appropriate. I think I think about this in a couple different ways. There's positive and, and negatives of both, right? Like anytime you're going slicers, um, it's a customized experience, so there's a lot more overhead, and you're typically probably going to use a bookmark. What's interesting to me is that there's not an option to switch the filter pane to the left hand side, because
Yeah.
I know that's a preference for a lot of my report users. That would be nice. But like if you want filters on the left hand side, slicers is your only option with some bookmarks to show and hide.
Yep.
the largest issue with that is you have to overrun your visuals, right? Because you don't get a sliding scale out and in like you do with the filter pane. But like I said, like it's time consuming to do that sort of practice. The positive parts about the filter pane are each filter has dynamic different ways you can choose to look at the data, especially with like date, right? I can, as an end user, I can pick basic, I can use the calendar, I can use relative date slicers, all of those are an option in the single filter without me having to customize an experience. And slicers, you just kind of pick one, right? The biggest problem I have with filter pane right now is I don't understand why they're adding the numbers, because they make no sense. They're like the model numbers,
Yep.
like all the behind the scenes numbers that have absolutely no relevance. So when an end user
Yep.
selects something,
It's like a
they're
distinct count on that column.
always
It's like
they're always absolutely confused
yeah.
because they expect that, well, that's a key number. I just filtered down and it like that means something. And every explanation, right? Like anytime somebody's new to Power BI and the filter pane, just ignore those. Ignore them. They mean nothing.
Yeah.
Like, why show them? Right?
There was a small period of time where those numbers disappeared. I don't know what. Someone turned off a feature or something like that for just like
good, turn it off.
And I loved it. I was like, oh great, these are finally gone, and that was very helpful because I 100% agree with you, Seth. There's these arbitrary numbers that I don't understand. For maybe a report builder standpoint, it makes sense, but in the service, I don't think you need them. Like it doesn't make sense when I'm rendering the report. Or if nothing else, give me the ability to control them on or off.
Yeah, let me choose.
I don't need them there, so let me turn them off. It doesn't add any value for my report, maybe.
Yeah,
that always instills a lot of confidence in a user when you're like, oh, just don't worry about that. It's just there. What?
Again, all this whole thing, but to me, just boils down to control. Microsoft thought of a good idea. It was implemented. Someone said, this is what we want to do. But instead of saying, let's just turn it on for everyone, just give me the toggle. Like, do the extra, like if you're going to add the feature, start with something with less features and then add them and toggle them on and off. I will point out here real quick, just because we
saw that pop in.
we got to correct our chat. So Tommy, you were talking about Power BI back in 2006. 2007.
You weren't using it then? 2006? Right after,
yeah, right when I got out of college.
World Cup 2000, yeah, right. It wasn't available.
So
I'm gonna double down on this.
Johnny has said 2007 ? And emoji face. So Johnny, you are in fact correct. It was not out that early. Tommy misspoke. It was 2016 is what he was meaning to say, and 2017 was the time period. He was like 10 years after.
I
don't know what you guys are talking about. I've known Power BI for 15 years.
15 years. I've been using Power BI for 15
on my
years
resume.
plus. Yeah. I saw that comment too, but I was just going to choose to ignore it.
I'm just going to say it now because this is commenting on YouTube, and so this is for the listeners on the podcast because they're walking right now and they're literally having a conniption going. I didn't even know Power BI was out in 2007, and so we're just making it wasn't. You're correct. Tommy misspoke. So, anyways,
yeah.
Go ahead, Seth.
I was just gonna say, there's another filter experience here, which is probably a little less known, but we've been exploring very deeply lately, which is the customized embedded filter. Like an application owns the filter experience.
Yep.
And I gotta say, man, like the capabilities that they built in the embedded space to filter reports and have applications interact with the Power BI report, you can do some really, really cool stuff.
Well, so to your point, Seth, there, right? So if you think about this, right? So the Power BI embedded space are the same APIs you're using to run the actual report inside the service. So if you have, just for whatever reason, if PowerBI.com decides, hey, I'm going to go render this report and I want to pre-filter some data, all of the APIs already exist to do that for you. All that Power BI embedding is doing is exposing those APIs in a documented way that says, here's how you would render this report by either using row level security or running it as, I've already rendered the report. I want the application to control the filter context. And so when you do that, and again, one of my other big beefs here with the filter pane is it only goes on the right-hand side of the page. Some people like the filter pane on the left-hand side of the page. Well, there is in my opinion, it should be a very simple toggle to be able to flip the side of the report of the filters on the left or the right. It's the code would be basically identical. You're just flipping the side on the page. So
fly out.
One would assume.
So, but apparently that's a lot of work, and so it hasn't been done yet, or maybe no one can find the ideas on the ideas.com. I don't Power BI ideas. I don't know what's going on. But
We'll write some non-technical documentation on that. So,
but you're sparky this morning.
I am sparky. I'm fired up. But on the other hand of this, though, like when you start letting the application do the filtering experience, you can now, if you're doing embedding, you can make your Power BI report look like anything else. You can make it look like the rest of your application. You can have the filter context the way you make sense to you. Like you can have it colored when you highlight something, you can color it differently. You can provide more filter context to the page. Like here's a text box outside of the report that says, here's all the things that you filtered. And then another thing that I think is really interesting with this, when you let the application do the filtering, and this requires, and I'll point this out, you need a developer to build this. This is not something that a business user will do.
Yeah.
We are purely in the developer space. But when you have that, if you have multiple reports using the same data model, you can now hop between reports and retain filter context as you jump between the reports. So it opens up a lot more possibilities for you to say, using like almost like drill through between reports becomes a newer option for you. And I guarantee you, drill through between reports, that's kind of what they're doing. They're probably picking up that filter context and just handing it over to the next report. Anyways,
so speaking of drill through.
Oh yeah.
Well, before we get to that, Seth, you raised some really awesome points that I want to highlight on slicers and then also on the filter panes. But first on the slicers, if you've moved to using filter pane, or even if you just have the slicers, because slicers are one of those unique visuals where a user can interact and change the behavior, so to speak. To me, the slicers really act. If you have a slicer on your page, you're suggesting the user take an action on this. So the only time we use slicers are really for a page. From what you said is because it's kind of part of the page where that's the point of the page is for you to use a slicer, like a company search or a lookup where it's prominent to the page and the purpose of that page. When you have 15 slicers on your report, it's one confusing for the user on what they're supposed to do and also trying to backtrack. Usually need a reset button, but the power of having like one or two slicers that are intended for that report page where the page didn't have any slicers, it doesn't really serve a purpose. There's a lot of power in that. But one thing I do want to bring up too, the other thing before we go to drill through, there is something to overcome with the filter pane still. Even if you do the formatting in a dynamic way and you make it part of the report, I have found over and over again that people do not know the filter pane exists. And it's very hard from a user point of view when they're first using it to understand the differences in it. And it's almost overwhelming. So that's like still the hard thing with the filter pane. It's not intuitive at all. I want to see if you guys have experienced that as well.
I would 100% agree with this. And I would say the discoverability of the filter pane is not well done. And when you publish it to the service, however you use the filter pane, if it's already pre-opened when you save the report,
right,
it'll save it open.
Per page.
So you could actually, so if you don't pay attention to your report, you'll have each page in your report will have filter pane open or closed depending on those reports. I'd also say it's important as a report designer, you pay attention to what's going on inside the filter pane because there are the report level filters.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I sometimes catch myself doing is I'll drop a page level filter on, but in reality that should have been at the report level. Mm-hmm. And so if you're not consistent as a report builder, let's say you have like product name, right? And you put it on the page level, a couple pages, and then you put it on a visual level on a different page. Now you've got this kind of inconsistent experience. And you want to say, well, maybe it would make sense for us to filter all pages throughout the entirety of the report by product name. I would, in my opinion, you should start every filter context with the entire report, unless you know you need a different context on a single page, and only at that time do you move the filters to the page level. And then, then once you're in the context of a page, then maybe you think, oh, I really do need to filter this visual to one filter thing, so I'll use that on the visual.
And for someone who studied philosophy, I can tell you this very much. For someone new in Power BI, trying to explain someone page level filters, report level filters, and visual level filters is very much the same way of explaining philosophy to someone for the first time. That is something to overcome on what is the difference between each level. So just, I don't know if you guys have seen that as well, but that is a hard thing for someone to overcome from a training point of view.
There's a lot of concepts in Power BI I think that challenge end users right out of the gate.
I think that's one of the hardest.
But I think it's also a lack of like understanding. Like, you know, again, right?
Yeah.
So up until this point, right, everyone's been used to using filters on a page, and if I just see it there and it's apparent to me, it makes sense. So let me give you couple thoughts. Tommy, you said a little while ago you were talking about, you know, actually maybe it was Seth a little bit. Seth was actually talking about the ability of making filter pane visuals, the filter visual show up and hide with bookmarks. We can do that, but I really wanted to make sure like it's clear here that the bookmark management can be difficult unless you have a pattern on how you manage bookmarks. And if you have a lot of bookmarks, those can be very unwieldy to make sure you have that. So you add a lot of overhead by making that filter pane. So I want to just kind of make that point there earlier from like Seth's earlier points. Yes, you can totally do it with bookmarks, but it's much more challenging to manage those bookmarks later on unless you have a good system to let the next developer know how you built them and what links to what bookmark. So that's one thing aside there. What I feel like with the filter pane though, the filter pane actually gives you some better filtering options. One thing the filter pane does not do, it doesn't give you like the date range slidey bar thing. So you can't take a date range and slide it. So that's one thing I think where the slicer filter does a better job with date ranges, picking 2 date ranges and then you know start and end based on a between time frame. So I think that's better than what we have today in the filter pane. However, the filter pane does a much better job of allowing you to put in like 2 date ranges, and you can kind of type in the date that's there or click from a calendar. I think the filter pane also lets you filter with a measure. So the filter pane gives you that additional ability. So if you say, I want to say filter this report where sum of sales is larger than a certain value or total sales, which is a measure, you can do that on the filter pane. So there's actually some additional controls that are happening in the filter pane that give me more advantage over the regular slicers on a page. So my default behavior now is to do as much as I can in the filter pane. And I've also noticed something here too. When users are building visuals, they are applying filters in measures or DAX statements. So like I want this year's sales. In some cases, if you want a card or a KPI card that has just this year's sales on it, you could actually just put this year's sales and you could say in the last 1 year or something along those lines. And you can actually apply filters to the visual and not have to write extra DAX measures. So something that I think people need to leverage more of is the ability of changing certain things, because the filter pane allows you to lock that filter context in and hide it from end users so they can't change it.
Now, the problem with that, that is a powerful feature, but the problem with that is this is another part of the filters we haven't talked about, is visual interaction, where you click on a data point, which will filter the rest of the report. If you do what you said, Mike, where you said 2021 only. Well, if you click on, let's say you're showing sales by, for 2021 and you say year to date, but it's just total sales filtered by 2021 and you click on the USA, the rest of the report's going to show you USA and 2021. It's not just going to show you USA.
I'm not talking about report or page level. I'm talking about visual level filters.
And I am telling you the same. Yeah. So I'm saying if you have a visual level filter.
Yep. It'll just blank it out.
On a bar chart, and you're hiding 2021 and you click on USA, the bar chart, the rest of the report, at least in my experience, will filter out 2021 and the USA when you click on the visual on the USA bar chart.
I don't think that's how it works. Not anymore.
It's
anyways.
happened to me. No,
I think that's user error.
Issue,
maybe that was in 2007.
That was 2007. I think that issue was showing.
I experienced that. One of my reports has that issue. Maybe if you hide it, I don't know, but this will go back to our steak dinner, I guess. But
is it the same field?
Yeah. So if you have a visual level filter on a card, and you put 2021. Because I tried this too. I tried to skirt around using an explicit measure and just said total sales.
Yep, exactly.
But what happened was I was like, with all the numbers, look, the trending chart. Look at your trending chart, and it's just going to show you 2021.
I'll have to
Right.
I mean, there
Yeah.
is. I mean, if you're clicking on
So
that though, I mean, like a bar chart. I mean, you are clicking on something that has additional filter context. I mean, I could see how that would work, right? So
right.
if I filtered a bar chart that has the USA sales on it, and when you click that chart, you are clicking the filter context of
And that
that
includes the
country
2021 filter.
and the 2021 filter. So I could see how
Right.
that would work, and it's actually pushing that
It's
USA
carrying it
filter to
over.
all visuals on the page.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
necessarily so again, use what I just recommended sparingly, but I mean, I usually typically use that. I would say I use that more often when I'm doing just a KPI card, something that's
Right.
not clickable, right? It's something that's just there,
Yes.
and you're not
something
selecting
not
something to
clickable.
get other stuff. And
Yeah.
I could see that.
But
That
try
works.
that on a bar chart, and from everything
That
I've
makes
done, I'm
sense.
looking, what the heck? So, and the other thing, if you do hide something,
I
I
agree with
would say
that.
from a user experience, which I agree, hiding stuff is, I would say, more than just valuable. If
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that are pre-configured, you should hide it.
Oh, I'd agree with
Because
you 100%.
yeah, because then you're like, oh, why is this? Everyone
Yeah.
just assumes everything's non-filtered.
What's your index equals 5? I don't know. But, you know, that's what we use. It's in the data model. Like, and then everyone's just like, then you
Why
get a
does-
million questions and service tickets like, why is this index thing here? And you're like, I don't know.
Why does
Like,
product codes contain EXX? Like,
exactly.
Speaking of filters, I have a product recommendation.
Uh-oh.
Right? Who are the consumers of our reports? Business users.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right. If I have,
I thought this
if
was
I
a
am
trapping question.
if I am exceeding the capacity of a visual, why can't we have a very nice message to the end user that says, try applying a filter instead of what we know, which is no kidding.
Yeah.
we're running out of memory in the
No dip,
visual.
Sherlock.
Like,
I'm out of memory.
Here's the link that gives you the activity of like how broken this is, or what, like the specific technical language. We don't want to see that. Like,
Yeah.
what we want to see is like, try selecting a filter instead of 2 terabytes of data.
Right.
Right? Like,
I feel like that's a feature that the visual should have. Like, if
Yeah.
error, show this message.
If default to the pretty message.
That is a great. That is a really good feature. Like, put that on ideas.com so it can't never be found again. So that's a good idea.
Oh man.
Sorry, I'm ripe.
You love that site, don't you?
We love that
Wow.
site. It's getting better. They're improving it.
You even
Microsoft's
wrote a blog about it, Mike. You're being so mean.
It's getting
You
better.
wrote an
It's getting
article
better.
about it.
It's still, man, I'm scraping that site for ideas, and there's so many ideas out there that are good, and I'm like, they're just never gonna get done. But I 100% agree with you, Seth. There should be better error messaging for when you're running the report to the business users, and that would be a really big win, I think. Or two things, right? If the query fails and it can't get, it's running out of memory, fine, do a top 10, top 100, and notify me.
Oh, that, yeah.
You just
No,
return.
or let me select just the arbitrary top 10.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Or
like,
say,
not
hey,
a measure.
Yeah, exactly.
Not-
Hey, this
'cause
visual's
not all
asking for too
tables
much
have
data.
them.
Yeah, this visual's asking for too much data. I can't get you the answer.
Oh,
I've returned the top 3 or 10 or 100 records. Please apply a filter to get more information. Done.
Yeah.
Move on.
it will show you an error message, but it'll be in the service, and it'll be someone else telling you, where you go, hey,
Or-
why is
or,
every bar chart
How about,
grayed out?
how about you return the 150,000 records and then just giving me a message that says, I only returned 150,000 records because you chose too much data.
Yeah.
If
They
the
do that
cap-
already
If the cap of the visual
for some
is
of
a
it.
certain level, give me the certain level, and then tell me you didn't get me everything.
Yeah.
Like, that's a better user experience.
And they do
Right.
they do have that too, right? So if you do like a line chart or a scatter
On
chart,
an aggregated,
yeah,
right?
yeah. If and there's like a little eye button that shows up, a little eye that says, "Hey,
Yeah.
there's too much. I'm starting to use sampling because there's too much data to get you this
Right.
answer." And I think particularly the error you're seeing, Seth, I think actually that's more table based a bit, and that's the tabling thing
I
doesn't
keep
again.
going back there for some.
Tables, man. We struggle with the tables piece. But to your point, though, like that same feature messaging, right? The little eye should show up and be like, "Hey, this table has too many records. We can't get you everything. Here's a subset of it. Please apply filters to get more of this."
I find it interesting. We're beginning to kind of shift, but which makes a lot of sense towards context and filters. And there's a very
Okay. Yep.
interrelationship, because we were going to talk about drill through too, which I think maybe is his own topic. Maybe we talk about now, but if you have hidden filters or applied filters or a visual level filter, it's all or an error. It's the whole point of this for the user to have a good experience is not so much that they can apply a filter,
Sure.
but whatever they're doing or looking at, they have the context of what they're looking at,
Yes.
which is the most imperative thing, because you can have all these great features
Yep.
and you can have a suggestion to use the filter pane, but if they're looking at a report and they don't know what they're looking at,
Yes.
or they don't have confidence in
I
what
like where
they're
you're
looking
going.
at,
Yep.
that is where the entire report falls apart.
I'd agree with you 100%.
So,
and I'd also say, Tommy, this is a much larger issue that I think's going on than I think people are aware of, because when you select things and then showing people what they've selected, all the time you get people. I mean, this is constant for me.
yeah.
People come back to us and say the report's blank, or the data's missing, or something's wrong
Right.
with the data model, and it's not that. It's the fact that they don't understand what they've selected, and the fact that there's filter context being applied somewhere in the report. Yes, you didn't have sales in that product in 2017. Like, you just didn't, because you
Yeah.
filtered it out. So like you erase the filters and start over again. So to your point though, that's also, I think, a bit of a burden on the report builder. Like, if there are important things you need to show someone that's being filtered, it's up to us to put a text box, a window,
Yeah.
an indicator that says this data has been filtered by these types of criterias. And honestly, I'd like a visual that would handle more of that for me. Like, it would almost like pretty print out the filter context and say I don't want to write
Right.
DAX every single time to make sure that it's popping out some information.
Yeah,
to us.
you're going to return blank rows if the report's filtered the last 2 years and you're looking for 2016.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I fail. I'm not remembering the visual name, but isn't that supposed to answer that problem? Like,
So the filter pane, I think, does
natural
that.
language. No, the natural language,
The smart narrative?
the smart narrative.
No, so that doesn't, it won't, it's going to show you highlights like anomalies,
Oh,
trends.
so it's like
but it's not
specific. Got it.
right. I'm sure like smart narrative or a data.
I want the narrative that's like you're being dumb. Back up.
Well, but this goes, I think, to the importance of labels and titles too. So I actually spent last week reading the ICBS like standards,
which is really good, by the way.
Yeah, which I need to read again because
So good.
I'm not smart enough to read that once and understand everything. But a lot of good stuff in there.
Yes.
In terms of like where do even titles go. But if you're hiding something on a filter pane, I think that needs to be in your title. Like if you're saying you're looking at a bar chart and it's only to a degree, right? Because if the rest of the if you're showing if you're throwing 3 visuals that have the same metric and one of them is filtered by, let's say, just the USA and the others are not, I think you need to put that, because if there's going to be some smart aleck out there who's going to export each one and then compare the numbers, say, hey, these numbers don't add up, kind of thing.
I agree with you in that respect, right? But there are always going to be hidden filtered contexts that you need to create on
to a degree,
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I think so, and I think that's part of as we look at a report, maybe we always get someone else to look at it, because it goes back to confidence in a report is not necessarily only tied to filters, but it is such a overlap where if a user does not understand that,
correct,
right, that this is a USA only visual, I think, and you want to hide it because that's the point of it. That's the intention of that visual.
This is actually a fantastic point, because as we were reviewing our reports, it all of a sudden it became very apparent that some of the key metrics we were sticking on the top of pages didn't have like current day or today next to them, and people were like
flipping out.
What is this calculation? It's not anything, right? Everybody's selecting date ranges and like it's not changing. We're like, well, it's the current day. Oh, we should probably label it that.
Where does that number come from? Yeah. Oh, that's the worst.
But that's a really good point though,
because how the hell did I get this number?
People expect, I mean, what you get very quickly used to, if I change a filter and it's not labeled correctly, you expect every time a filter adjusts or I click something in the report, I'm expecting the numbers to bounce around a little bit. And if you don't clearly label, like, this is a today only calculation and it's separate from other parts on the page, this is again proper design on like how you are thinking through the page. And and I think this is one of the Gestalt principles that I think goes really well here, is if you start building bounding box on your background, that, hey, these 3 or 4 visuals go together in this bounding box, the expectation is that they'll kind of operate together. And if you have something that's, a calculation that's like today's only type calculations, you're putting that somewhere else on the page, and that gets its own bounding box because it is you're using that Gestalt principle of proximity. It's not near or
Right.
grouped with other things, therefore it's separate. And so you can actually make those different calculations. And so that way when you're editing the page, everything else is adjusting except that one calculation at the top.
So that actually, I got some more non-technical documentation than that I may have to write too, because one of the this is actually a pro for slicers. The slicers are powerful because usually they say what's already pre-filtered on it.
Exactly.
So, and that's already prominent on the page, right?
And you can't hide that.
You can't hide that.
Yeah,
It's going to say,
the filter pane
this is
can.
filtered by, what
Yes.
country. But the other thing too is you can actually write, and I've tried using this in the past, where you can actually write DAX functions to show like dynamic titles, because you can actually make
Yep.
titles and
Yep.
functions, which are great. However, you can't write 50 DAX measures for each visual. To me,
Correct.
needs to be something a little easier where you can say, show a title with the whatever's filtered here, right?
Yes, I'd
Well,
agree.
because I've tried writing and I had like 15 DAX measures that I would apply to each of these titles, which is like, okay, but now if I add another visual, I need another measure because I can't set, can't dynamically have one measure to show different titles.
I agree with that 100%.
So, but that's huge though, because that's part of that context, because the filter pane isn't prominent. And again, it's not someone, even though it's there, even if you have it expanded,
Yes.
even if you have it highlighted in neon green, what's being applied in the card itself. I've seen this enough times where users aren't going to go, oh, let me look there first to see what's being applied. They're just going to assume something's wrong with the report or the numbers aren't right.
I'd agree with you.
So, and this, so there's parts with user training too, but there's that prominence and that confidence on what they're looking at. So
I think people will, again, over time, I think in general, people will get more comfortable with using, I think, the filter pane. I think what you're seeing right now, Tommy, with your survey, the majority of people are still using slicers because that's all they know. And
60%.
I think, yeah, 60%. So give me the breakdown. You said slicers, and then you said filter pane, and then you said two others. But what's the breakdown of slicers and filter pane?
So I wish I had a larger data set. So maybe if someone like Power BI Tips released this, so we get a little more results kind of thing. But
we'll send out a survey today on Power BI Tips channel.
Yeah, I would be interested. We'll follow up on Thursday.
We'll follow it up.
But 60% said, what is a better experience for a consumer in a Power BI report? 60% was saying using visual slicers, which I was very surprised about.
Compared to?
19% was the filter pane.
Whoa. That's a big drop. That's 3x of like 3 times
19,
more users want to see the filter slicers in the pane.
Now get this, 19%, another 19% was using visual interaction. So use like selecting the bar chart and having the rest of the report filter.
Yeah, innate.
Oh.
So the same as the filter pane.
Wow.
And then 4% was drill through, which just means one person more or less.
One person that likes that. That was Tommy. Tommy voted for his own drill through. Thanks.
I actually voted for the filter pane, so I'm the one who skewed it too. But if I didn't vote, the visual interactive filter, so things on the canvas, would have been more than the filter pane.
That makes sense. I mean, that's a technique that I used earlier on. I like that though. I mean, that's something that I really enjoy. Like if I'm looking at the page, I'm trying to build, like I'll build a bar chart with a number on it just so I can show a selection criteria and allow you to select that. The only downside with this is it doesn't necessarily retain your filter context unless you hold the control key and click multiple things. So I still, I build reports today that do that, but to me, I'm familiar with it. So I know holding the control key will let me select multiple objects on a page across those filtering things. But yeah, that's interesting to me. I did not think about that.
And maybe then that raises a lot of questions on what is that on the fault of Microsoft? Is that the fault of us, or is that just the user behavior?
I think we're entering a new era here. I think this is
a new era.
Well, and I think if you look at the people who are doing the data modeling, right? And I've talked to a number of other MVPs where they've been like, "Hey, dude, I know how to model data to the nth degree. I've been doing data modeling forever, but I struggle on the visualization building side, and that's just not their forte. They like the data and the data engineering, the data modeling side. I think we're seeing a new arm of how we have to build reports for people, because typically it would be in Excel. It doesn't need to be super pretty. It's just very functional. And so now we're looking at this whole, with the introduction of Power BI, we now have this whole UI UX space that's also important, as well as the data quality. So not only do you need a strong data modeler, you need someone who's a bit artistic and looking at the UI and UX. And so I seriously think our children, the people who are like used to using apps and have had computers and the internet since they've been born, they're going to
Are
be
you
more
serious?
apt to like just even like they're already going to have that mindset of like this doesn't look right, it doesn't feel like it does, the flow of this doesn't look right. So I think this will become part of the next generation of business workers that come into the field, that they're going to not only know how to engineer the data, but they're also going to take into account some level of UI UX so that it works really useful.
Yeah. And I think the data modeler probably has the idea where you have the intention of each, where the filter pane is permanent.
Yep,
It's like the back end.
agreed.
A slicer is semi-permanent, and then the visual level is temporary. And that's the use cases for each. And I think that's how people perceive it.
Yes, exactly.
So
Cool. I think we could talk about this one all day. Things have been super fun. We're almost at an hour already, so we should probably do the wrap. For those who are listening to the Explicit Measure Podcast, this is the month of August, I believe. I'm trying to get the right months here. Things are moving so fast these days. Tonight we're actually doing a Power BI user group for the Milwaukee group. Michael's still trying to figure out what the topic's going to be. So we will kind of, we may wing it a little bit. So it could be fun, could be not fun. So for those of you who are like listening to the live stream or listening today, feel free to join us on the Power BI user group tonight. It'll be on the Power BI Tips YouTube channel if you want to come in and follow along. It'll be live later this evening. With that, I'd like to say thank you all for listening. We really appreciate you as being listeners to the podcast. We have a lot of fun, as you can tell, with the laughing and the constant banter between us. We enjoy the podcast. If you also are finding yourself walking around yelling at the podcast, having internal discussions around what we're talking about as well, please make sure you share that love with somebody else. Tap someone on the shoulder and say, hey, there's an interesting podcast that you may laugh at or have some fun with. Please, we recommend you just share it with someone else who may find some value from this as well. And with that, Tommy, where else can you find the podcast on?
you can find the podcast anywhere they're available: Apple, Spotify. So make sure to subscribe, leave a rating. That's huge for us. We would really appreciate that.
please.
We also do anywhere you can log in, especially YouTube, 7:30 in the morning Central Time, Tuesdays and Thursdays. If you want to join in the conversation, go to the Power BI Tips website if you want to join the mailbag and actually submit a topic for something for us to talk about.
Awesome. And with that, thank you, everyone. We appreciate it, and we'll see you guys on Thursday.